And that's a worry to some of them because they get tired and they begin to lose focus.
If an interpreter interprets for 2 periods, his strength is always gone, and so he needs to be changed to rest.
Many students lose lessons, though they sit in class. Others have given up hope of developing themselves because of the frustration.
But sometimes they have problems in learning because if the interpreter is who is supposed to interpret what is being taught to them, they are not there, and they will sit idle throughout the lesson.
Some old students volunteer to help, but this is a temporary measure. The school is sponsoring them to pursue professional training to come back and help. In the difficulty, hearing students sign for hearing impaired students. Meet Patience. She can hear.
You can see Patience, one of the students in this class. Now, she's here also to learn. Teaching is ongoing, and she has to sit down and be part of what is being taught. But there are 3 hearing impaired students here. There is no sign interpreter, but Patience is able to sign. And so instead of her sitting down and paying attention to her teacher, she's compelled to get up and sign for these 3 to understand what the teacher is teaching. She's losing time with her teacher. She has to catch up after classes are over.
Teachers say this is a difficulty and puts such students at a disadvantage.
And a situation where, for instance, a sign language teacher is not in, and a good student in sign language is signing, is equally learning, but we don't encourage that.
Anytime I'm signing, the teacher is talking, and I'm teaching and I'm signing. I also get the access to also take something, but not all. I have to also find time for myself and go and sit and learn what the teacher have taught.
The school runs 5 programs. If there are hearing impaired in all programs, the school will need about 30 sign language interpreters.
The point is that just imagine you're in a classroom and you are teaching as a master and there's no interpreter. Possibly the master might not be able to interpret it. These hearing impaired students are sitting down watching you. When you are teaching the hearing students, they feel like they are left out. Sometimes as a master, when you see their faces, you don't feel happy.
First-year hearing impaired students are given 1-year preparatory lessons before being integrated into the class of hearing students. This is to ensure smooth integration. In all these difficulties, the school has chalked successes.
Formally, students with hearing impairment go about in the community. They can't communicate with any other person apart from their fellow deaf. But now that has been minimized because the products of St. John's, especially around Navrongo, most of them are able to communicate when they meet hearing impaired.
Several students would have dropped out due to inadequate sign interpreters. School authorities want the Education Ministry to increase support to deepen inclusive education. Brighton Anafo, TV3.
All right, and that's in Navrongo in the Upper East region. Rhoda, let me quickly come back to you. The inclusive education policy, how well have we done with it?
Bright, thank you for having me in the studios again, and I'm always happy to talk about inclusive education because UNICEF stands for equity, and we believe that every child should be given an equal opportunity and access to education, to health and nutrition, to protection. So that is what UNICEF stands for. And we are also happy to be part of the inclusive education story, to be working closely with government to implement inclusive education in Ghana. As you rightly said, the inclusive education policy has been developed. It was launched in 2016, and fortunately for us as a country, we are one of the few in sub-Saharan Africa that has developed an aspirational inclusive education policy. Let me also add that with the policy launch, some level of implementation has taken place, and with funding support from USAID, UNICEF has worked closely with government, specifically the Ministry of Education and the Ghana Education Service, to implement inclusive education in some districts. And we've realized that the benefits by including children who are disadvantaged in school are enormous. If you look at the inclusive education policy, it defines inclusion as giving access to education to every child, and the emphasis is on every child, including those who are disadvantaged. Those who are disadvantaged includes persons with disability or children with disability. It could look at people coming from a particular religious group, orphans. You could look at children with nomadic children who have HIV and all of that. So in summary, if you talk about inclusive education, it's appreciating the diversity in a school or appreciating the diversity in a classroom.
Have we done well with this, getting all these kids to go to school?
Fortunately for us as a country, last year we just completed an education sector analysis with an enhanced focus on inclusive education. Education sector analysis was spearheaded by the Ministry of Education with support from UNICEF. And as a result of that analysis that was done, we realized that a few gaps, implementation gaps, were identified. Again, looking at the analysis, we concentrated on 3 thematic areas. We looked at policy and system capacity. We looked at data trends. We also look at the resources, the budgets that goes with implementation.
I see.
And again, looking at the policy and system capacity, Ghana as a country has a very conducive legislative environment to support
these
implementation of the policy.
Right.
But there are challenges at the subnational level.
Let's talk about the challenges which you refer to as captured in the review, in the analysis. How worrying were they? What were some of them, and how worrying were they to the program itself?
Yes, so if you look at the findings from the analysis at the policy and the system capacity, we looked at the policy. We realized that the policy was an excellent one. It was an aspirational one. But when it comes to the knowledge of inclusive education and how teachers would even be able to manage the children in the classroom, there was a gap. And if you compare districts that receive some level of support from UNICEF to implement inclusive education, we realize that at least their technical know-how, their ability to even do basic identification in the classroom to see that this child probably, I suspect, that has some level of disability, and so I should refer for further diagnosis and support so that the child will be able to come back to the classroom and perform. So that gap, we realize,
has to be closed. Teachers don't have that knowledge and skill.
Exactly. So the technical know-how, the ability to be able to even do the basic identification and support the children in the classroom, we realized was a challenge in some of the districts. Yes,
I see. And so how do we then close this gap you're talking about?
Fortunately for us, just last year the Ministry of Education and the Ghana Education Service came together to develop an inclusive education training for teachers in schools at the in-service level. So fortunately we have a training package already in place, and we need to actually speed up in terms of using that resource which is already available to train the teachers. Because if you look at the model, it looks at different areas. It looks at even your general knowledge about what the inclusive education policy says. It also looks at how, as a teacher, can you even do basic identification so that you'll be able to identify the needs of your children in the classroom and be able to provide the needed support for them.
So some work is being done at correcting this.
Exactly.
How quickly can we say that this can be rectified so that we don't disadvantage a lot of the kids who will be caught up in this?
So we need all stakeholders to come on board. Again, let me also emphasize that apart from developing the inclusive education policy, it comes with a costed implementation plan. And that costed implementation plan have strategies as to how we can best implement the policy. And so as a stakeholder or as an NGO or a civil society organization that wants to work closely with government to implement inclusive education policy, you could make reference to the implementation plan.
Document.
You could also refer to the IE insert model that has been developed to train the teachers. And so we would encourage that all stakeholders come on board, whether NGOs, development partners, to join forces with government so that together we'll be able to give teachers the capacity they need to support these children. Because there's one thing advocating for them to be in school, and it's another thing ensuring that when they are in school, they are actually benefiting from learning.
Rhoda, I'm grateful for your time with us here. Mrs. Rhoda Angel is an education officer with UNICEF talking about inclusive education. Thanks so much for your time once again.
Thank you, Brian.